I could flee very high.
It's a new day, but not on the Enterprise. We're in a shuttle with Reed and Tucker, and they're poking around an asteroid field. They're trying to find the Enterprise, this being their arranged rendezvous point, but the shuttle's sensors and phone are both buggered, which is making the job much harder. Reed eventually finds something on one of the asteroids, and the scattered debris contains a sheet of metal that looks distinctly like a piece of the Enterprise. The Enterprise itself is apparently unaware of its own destruction, as it's currently flying somewhere else. We have some guests aboard, the Tesnians to be specific, who are very upset at having just lost the ship they've lived in for years. Whatever malfunction they suffered when trying to dock caused them to hit the Enterprise before face-planting into the asteroid we just saw, though everybody had enough time to get to escape pods, it seems. T'Pol has a theory about the problem being caused by micro-singularities, but Archer thinks this is nonsense. Either way, we're giving the Tesnians a lift home, despite the repairs needed to our own ship. Back in the shuttle, Tucker and Reed are already mourning their dead crew. Any escape pods would have still been here, so they've assumed there are no survivors. This is bad news for a number of reasons, not least of which because Earth is a little bit further away than the 10 days' supply of air they've got. Tucker's idea is to fly towards the nearest communications relay so they can use their portable distress beacon to contact Starfleet. This will take at least a few weeks, and that's not including how long a ship would need to get here, but at least their bodies would be found. With no other bright ideas, they take a last look at the assumed final resting place of the Enterprise, then fly in the direction that Reed thinks might possibly be the right one, as their sensors are still shagged. While they travel, Reed's taking the opportunity to make a record of events to date. In short, they were testing some scanners, and that required putting a bit of distance between themselves and the Enterprise. Something twatted them during this test and buggered all of the stuff that now isn't working. A return to the asteroid field the Enterprise was supposed to be mapping revealed the debris they saw. Tucker doesn't much care for making a record, as he's still repairing things and thinks it's defeatist. Reed changes the topic by preparing some food instead, and finds a bottle of stashed booze in the process. They might be facing a slow death, but at least they won't have to face it sober. That may not be enough. Reed's recording a letter to his parents later, and it's part of a series of recordings that have taken hours. Tucker's had his fill and implies violence if Reed doesn't shut his fucking cake hole, so despite considering it a waste of their remaining time, he takes a little nap to help calm things down. We're back on the Enterprise, and so are Tucker and Reed. Archer compliments Reed on some daring act or other, the details of which we don't receive, then buggers off, leaving Reed with T'Pol. Whatever's happened, she's very taken with his bravery, so much so that she's become particularly friendly, so friendly that she starts to smile and then laugh. She's leaning in for a kiss as Reed is awoken back on the shuttle by squealing electronics. Tucker's managed to fix half of the phone. Sadly, it's the listening part rather than the talking part, and it's very low range, but at least it's a start. Good news has to be matched by bad, though, which comes in the form of a repeat of whatever knocked out their systems in the first place. It doesn't break anything new, at least, unless you count the hull breach. A hole is obviously bad news at the best of times, and even more so with limited air. They can't scan for it because that's buggered, so Tucker has the idea to flood the shuttle with a visible gas so they can see where it's leaking. The breach turns out to be a pair of them, and in a perfect example of Starfleet professionalism, they pack the holes with mashed potato. Tucker thinks a pair of holes means something went through the shuttle, which would certainly explain why one of their oxygen tanks is also bollocksed. They now have 2 days of air remaining. Reed's rather confused by the hull breach. Starfleet may have a blasé approach to self-preservation, but even they build shuttles to withstand impacts bigger than your average pea. Tucker concludes it must not have been a simple rock then, and wonders if this might also be what did the Enterprise in. On the plus side, he has a plan to slightly extend their air supply. It'll mean turning the shuttle into a freezer, but they'll gain an extra half a day. Not a delightful prospect, but a lot can happen in 12 hours. Back on the Enterprise, T'Pol's made a discovery. She's been doing a science to some scans and thinks she can prove her micro-singularity theory, with a conclusion that these baby black holes are what knackered the Tesnian ship. Some even hit the Enterprise, but our hull was thick enough to resist until they faded, which is apparently something they do. Archer's sold on the idea now, despite his earlier skepticism, mainly because he agreed to meet Tucker and Reed in the same place we got hit. Best give them a call to meet up somewhere else, otherwise one of these things might impact the shuttle and completely arse up their oxygen or something. It's a tad frosty in the shuttle, and Reed's back on his recording bullshit. This time it's a series of almost identical messages to various women, all quite short and rather impersonal. Perhaps Tucker starts talking about the Enterprise crew just to shut him up, but his refusal to accept their own impending death just pisses Reed off. Except it's not actually the positivity that's pissing him off, and after the application of a little alcohol, and Tucker calling him a miserable twat, Reed admits that the Enterprise crew were the only people he'd ever actually started to be himself around. There's nothing left for it but getting thoroughly wankered, so they do. Reed's busy objectifying T'Pol when they start getting something more than just garbled noise on the broken phone. The signal eventually resolves itself into Hoshi changing the rendezvous point and saying they'll be arriving in a couple of days. That's a wee bit longer than the air will last, and they've got no way of telling Hoshi as much, but at least they now know everybody's still alive. The pair has sobered up later and are trying to figure out how to survive with no oxygen. As evolving into plants isn't an option, they instead start thinking about how to make the Enterprise get here a bit quicker. Not responding to the phone call will make them a little concerned, but Tucker thinks they won't put their boot down properly without a reason. After establishing they'll be on the Enterprise's sensors by this point, Reed comes up with the idea of kabooming our engine. A burst of energy at the rendezvous point should be enough to get them running, he thinks, and as sublight speeds in a shuttle aren't going to make much difference, Tucker eventually agrees and they eject, then kaboom the engine. It's later again when Tucker and Reed are playing a game of how long until we die. The closest guess gets the last of the liquor, but Tucker's less interested in his win than the idea he's just had. 10 hours oxygen for them both is 20 hours oxygen for one of them. That's why he's going to climb into the airlock. Reed thinks he's joking until he starts doing it. This all seems rather unsporting, so he points his pistol at Tucker and threatens to shoot him if he doesn't stop being a self-sacrificing arse. Stunning them both would seem the smarter option to me, as you use less oxygen when unconscious, but maybe they're worried about not waking up when it's this cold. Regardless, threats about demoting Reed if they survive fail to convince him, and Tucker sits back down again to wait and see what happens. Reed awakes in sickbay, only this time it's real, as there's just 2 minutes left of the episode. Either that, or he's dying of hypoxia in a shuttle, and the rest of the series is a hallucination before his brain shuts down, but let's assume it's option 1. Archer's telling him they saw the kaboom and rushed over to find them with only a couple of hours air left. The unconsciousness, presumably, was the hypothermia they're currently treating. He buggers off to let Reed rest, and so does T'Pol without a kiss, so we'll leave he and Tucker to recover as we get ready to take another step on the long road. When you spend $12 million of the budget for a new show on your opening story, according to the director anyway, it's rather unsurprising to find a bottle episode further along in the season to try and balance the books. For those unaware, a bottle episode is basically a story that tries to spend as little money as possible. Whilst there's no definitive proof for where the term comes from, one possible answer refers to episodes of the original Star Trek that happened largely or entirely aboard the Enterprise, and thus described as ship-in-a-bottle stories. Tangentially, this origin of the term is unlikely to be accurate, as Bob Justman, who was co-producer on the original series, stated for the book Inside Star Trek that other programs also used the term bottle show in reference to bottling up the action. Regardless of the etymology, a bottle episode doesn't necessarily mean a bad one. The frankly superb duet in the first season of Deep Space Nine proves this, and there are plenty of similar examples both in and out of Trek. There may even be an underlying correlation, as a story that requires minimal new stuff needs something else to take up the time. None of the main cast are getting paid per word of dialogue, so a focus on character is about as low budget as you can get. For any viewer who isn't tuning in to see explosions, this is generally considered a good deal. Now, I'm not suggesting that SHUTTLEPOD 1 is as good as Duet, because, frankly, I don't think it comes close, but it is still a chance to learn more about Reed. We've another nod to the situation with his parents, for example, and possibly some more evidence of him being eligible for the shit parent support group. In a recording to them, Reed says he doesn't understand why his parents claimed they didn't know he was serving on the Enterprise, as he'd written twice. A probable contact with an aunt who knew during the same period seems to preclude them not being aware. So is it possible they genuinely didn't know, or more likely the comments to Archer were deliberate? The latter option certainly ties into the air of disapproval his dad gave off, an attempt to undermine the choices Reed has made with his own life. At the risk of reading too much into things again, Reed trying to apologize to them for the outside possibility of them not knowing feels like the constantly wrong child trying to appease parents who can never be satisfied. That's not all we get, as there's the matter of those impersonal letters to former girlfriends. Dominic Keating himself has some good insights into this, with the idea that Reed struggles with interpersonal relationships so much that brief liaisons are worthy of note to him, despite those partners having likely forgotten about him. The most important thing we learn about Reed, though, is that despite many of the crew considering him rather closed, he sees them as the first chance he's ever had to be anything but. His behavior in this episode, his acceptance of death, makes more sense in this context. He's not simply mourning the loss of the crew, he's also mourning the loss of his new, freer self, the one he couldn't find a way to be around normal people. In a way, he feels that he has already died. We're back to the matter of found family again, and at the risk of my semi-regular nods to neurodivergence, perhaps the idea of him only being truly comfortable around people who are wired differently. Starfleet is not for normal people. Anybody in it has at least one screw loose, and I say that as someone with a bit of rattling hardware myself. To be around such people is to feel the quieting of a background noise you hadn't even realized was present. Once you start to understand the liberating effect this is having on you, the prospect of their loss is far more personal than the mere absence of a friend. Before we go, there's a technical point I need to take issue with. When we discover scattered debris on the asteroid, Tucker and Reed conclude it's the Enterprise because of a section of hull plating showing part of the registry number. Unfortunately, this damage simply does not match the ship. You can see that the plate shown is far too tall to be from the framework of the shuttle bay doors. What's curious is how this could happen when they're both computer-generated. My guess would be the debris shot was created without details of where it was coming from, but a quick scan of images of the hull didn't reveal any other place where the registration number is next to a red line. I even had a check of decal sheets for scale models. So somebody must have known enough about the assignment to be aware of the line, whilst also not knowing the dimensions. It's a bit of a puzzler as to what reference material they could have been using. My guess the debris might be from the alien ship, if that ship just happens to be sharing a 01 designation, and the aliens are using Arabic numerals from Earth, and painting them on their ship in black paint with a red stripe on a hull the same grey as ours. I suspect it being an oopsie is the more likely option, though. All of this is a relatively minor technical detail, and one I only really mentioned because I'm curious as to how it could happen in the first place. As to the episode itself and whether it was worth your time, then the answer to that question really depends on what you wanted. If you tune into Trek for the aliens and effects, then you'll find literally nothing here to hold your attention. If, like me, you're more curious about what drives the sort of people who climb aboard a big metal box and fly into the unknown, then it does a pretty decent job of showing us the guy in charge of all the guns is kind of a mess. As someone with an affinity for broken things, I confess I find that quite endearing. End of episode.
Bad news. Hoshi's a no-go.
Oh, bugger, what's the problem?
Something about mutiny being deeply unethical or some such.
Unethical? What the bloody hell's ethics got to do with Starfleet? All the captains we've met have done at least one genocide.
Jen, we lost count.
Maybe that's why Hoshi almost quit a while back. Anywho, she's not up for it, so Tucker will need to nobble the phone.
Aye, well, it could be worse, I guess. What about Travis?
Still working on it. I'm trying to figure out what he wants.
He's a forever ensign. Offer him the captain's chair.
Are you sure that's wise, giving an ensign the position of captain?
I didn't say the position, I said the chair. We just need to wire it up before he sits down. Oof.